Hey guys, so I wanted to create one more video here, kind of like a review of specifically the float positioning, but just to talk about the differences between all the different types of positioning we've talked about in the last few videos here. Because I know your book gets into some really advanced uh, types of positioning, but I really want to talk about exactly what we need to know to complete our layouts. Okay, so the differences I need you to take from these videos are float, which means whenever you float an object, you can float it to the left, you can float it to the right. What happens is anything after it in the code is going to try to flow around it. Okay, and we're going to work with that right now. I'm going to show you examples of that because we're going to need that for our navigation bars. It's also commonly used for images. The other thing I need you to understand is the absolute. Okay, absolute positioning means that the item that you're moving, you can move in pixels, okay, from a specific point, either from the top of the browser itself or from its parent, as long as its parent has a position of relative set to it. It moves out of the normal flow, things move up and take its place, and then you can place it wherever you'd like, manipulating the pixels. And there's relative, which works similar to absolute, except it moves with the pixels, but anything below it in the code in the normal flow does not move up and take its place. It respects its original area that it would have taken up, and the content below it stays where it would have been. Okay, so those are the three main differences from the three positioning types I want you to take into account. Okay, forget about everything else. That's what you need to know for making our layouts. So I'm going to make a couple more examples here using floats. And what I've changed in our example here is I've made our div into a UL with some list items, which are going to turn into our navigation at some point. And I made a paragraph with the logo. So there's our unordered list is that blue box, and inside it are these list items. Okay. And what I'm going to do with these list items is I'm going to float each of them left. And you might say, well, they're already left. Why would you float each one left? Well, if you remember, every time you float something left, the next thing below it moves up next to it, and so on and so forth. So these two below it, about in contact, after we float the first one, are going to move up. And because each one of these is a list item, and I'm going to set them all to float to the left, then they're all going to bump it and move next to each other. So here we go. I'm going to create a new CSS rule for just my list items, and you probably want to be more specific than just li in your real layouts, but for this example, this is as specific as we need to get. We'll talk about being specific in future videos. So list item, oh whoops, this is wrong. We're going to float the li's to the left. Okay. So let's go see what this is going to do. Right now they're stacked on top of each other. Each is a block level element. That's why they don't line up next to each other to begin with. But as soon as I float the first one to the left, the next one's going to move up. And because each one is an li, each one wants to float to the left. Okay, so let's hit refresh here. And you'll see here that they bumped up right next to each other. Forget the dot for the outline of the list item. The word home is right next to the word about, and contact has bumped up next to the word about. Okay, so when you float items and they're all floated left and they follow each other, they're going to bump up next to each other and just sit right next to each other, like they're doing here. Okay, this is kind of like the start of what our navigation is going to be. And you could also, because list item is a block level element, you can give it all the other properties we've learned for block level elements. In this case, I'm going to give each one a margin on the right side. We'll give it 40 pixels for now. That's pretty big. And you'll see now I've created some space because each one now has a margin to the right of it of 40 pixels. Okay, and you'll also want to get rid of the dot, right? And also, none of these are actually links yet, but it's the start. And you're probably asking yourself, why did the aqua box seem to collapse? Well, if you remember what we talked about in terms of normal flow, as those move up, everything below it now ignores it, right? It's like it's not there. So this unordered list box thinks it's empty, so it's collapsed its height, okay? And there's ways to fix that, and we're not actually going to do this exact setup for our real navigation, but it'll be similar, and we'll come up with a different fix. But for now, I'm going to fix this by just giving the unordered list itself, that box, a height that's big enough to hold the three list items. So there we go. So this kind of starts to look like a navigation bar, right? Obviously they're not links, right? I can't click on these, but it's the start. and I'm just talking about positioning right now, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay. I'll let our video catch up here. And the next example I'm going to show you is the logo and what that does when you give it a float. Alright, so I think I'm moving on to the logo here. So right now you might be thinking, well, why does it seem like there's some text next to the logo, right? It's sitting right next to it. You got to remember that an image is a inline element. It's not a block element, even though it's a big box usually. It only takes up as much room as it needs. So in this case, there's enough room for this text to be sitting next to it on this line. Okay, so it's only taking up that much room. And I'm going to go to my code here in a second, and you'll see that I have this image sitting inside of my paragraph tag, which is why they're all sitting next to each other. So there's my paragraph tag, there's my image, okay, there's my paragraph. They're all sitting inside the paragraph tag, okay. And I've given my image a class that I've named float left, and you don't have to name yours float left, you can name it whatever you want. This just makes sense because that's exactly what I'm going to do with this class. I'm going to create a class that floats this image to the left. Okay, so let's go to my CSS, and this time I'm going to use dot float left because it's a class. That's how you call out a class. Don't forget the period if you're calling out a class. And I'm going to float it to the left. And just like the LIs, everything after this image is going to need to move up and flow around it, still respecting its space, but move up and flow around it. So let's see what this does when I hit refresh here in a second. There you go. The text has decided to move up. It's no longer on the same line as the image. The image is out of the normal flow of things. It's no longer in that paragraph. Okay? Even though in the code it is, this paragraph has now moved up and around it. Okay? And in this case, it looks like we have some text below it, and if you wanted to fix that, you can easily do that by giving it a margin and creating some more space around the image itself, and then voila, we have some more space there, and things look great. So that's basically what I wanted to show you in terms of float. Okay, so hopefully that makes more sense now. And then don't forget that after float, things move up around it. If you're using absolute, whatever you apply the absolute to does the same thing as the float, right? It moves out of the normal flow, but things take its place. It doesn't move around it. It actually takes the place of the absolute element. And if it's relative, it works the same as absolute, except things don't move that come after it in the code. Things stay in their normal flow, and you can move a relative object around however you like. Okay? So that's it for positioning this week. Okay? That's what I need you guys to understand, and hopefully you do.